Greetings, you two. Balthazar the mage is a gnome, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. And that chip is he's short. And he would really like to be perceived as the big man on campus. So he goes about worming his way into the court structure of a kingdom. It takes him years. Sometimes it's just through being useful. Sometimes it's through sabotaging someone else's career. Sometimes it's a little money here, a few favors there, and maybe, possibly, one or two people have accidents. You know how dangerous it can be in life. But he gets himself this far from the throne in a plausible position that if things were to go suddenly pear-shaped, that those who hold the keys to power might be okay with Balthazar being the firm hand to help settle things down and set the kingdom right, and making him king in the process. Or maybe high regent if you don't want to go for king. Regardless, he'd be top dog, which is what he wants. So he gets his plan ready, he hatches it, and it goes miserably bad. Those pesky kids, the adventurers, thwart Balthazar's plans, and Balthazar just barely escapes with the skin on his butt. He's wounded, he's demoralized, and he retreats. Now, he's got a retreat option. He's been smart enough to do that. So he licks his wounds and then he decides, what am I going to do next? It took him 30 years to get into that position. And while gnomes do live longer than humans, he doesn't want to have to go through all that work again. He really wants to make sure that if he could be big man on campus, it's going to be under his conditions and it'd be in a situation where nobody can thwart his plans. So Balthazar decides he's going to become a god king. And this is how he does it. He decides the best way to do it is have a kingdom under his own control. And conventionally, that's hard to do, as his failure just demonstrated. And of course, you could go out into the wilderness and start your own, but that could take longer than Balthazar's life. Now, he wants something that's going to be doable. So, he hires some workers to carve him a cavern deep in the earth. And being a very literally minded mage, we'll say he's lawful neutral and a little obsessive compulsive, Balthazar's not the healthiest person. He decides this cavern needs to be square and exactly 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. With a roof that's 200 meters high. Yes, I'm using meters. I'll keep all the European folks happy. Actually, the entire planet happy, except for America and that one other country that always escapes my memory that also uses imperial. We are such boobs. So he builds the large cavern, and at part of the large cavern is a moat that goes all the way there on the outside. It's 20 meters wide. Now you're thinking, what's he gonna do with this? It's not that large. But then again, neither is Balthazar. Balthazar really wants to be a god king. So he spends the next 20 years studying in secret, pulling in creatures and humanoids whenever he needs them, whether they agree to or not, to help him in his experiments. And eventually, he perfects the process. And the process is miniaturization. That's a tough one to say. Balthazar figures out how to take your average person of 180 centimeters, we're just going to take that average, and shrink them down to 5 millimeters in size. That big. That's how big they are. 5 millimeters in size. Perfect in every way. Completely functional. In fact, in the right scale setting, they would never know that they have been reduced to that size. Balthazar then finds himself a druid, one who's also evil, and hires her to set up a complete functioning biosphere inside his cavern. Everything. And one of the things he does is set up a sun-moon cycle. It goes from one corner to the other, so it's going diagonally across the room. And it goes in an arc. It takes a month from one side of the arc to the other side of the arc and back again. A sun for 12 hours, and then a moon cycle with a dark moon on either end of the cycle, and then it goes to full moon and then back to dark. It takes 12 hours of moon, 12 hours of day. There are clouds in here. There's a complete biosphere in the place. All of it miniaturized to the scale of a 5-millimeter human that is equivalent to a 180 centimeter human in the real world. This means this cavern is effectively 365 kilometers by 365 kilometers. That's a pretty big space. That's vastly further than your average medieval person ever traveled from their home. Your average medieval person could very well never travel more than 20 kilometers from where they were born, and they would live inside that zone. It was very rare for them to go further than that. And to make sure that his people just don't escape after he places them in this trap of his, he puts an anti-magic field. So the only magic that functions is the moon-sun cycle, and him, because he has a special ring that exempts him from this. But anyone else inside this thing has no magic. He gets it all set up, and when he's done, the first person he tests it on is his druid. He shrinks her and her animal companion down to the requisite size, dumps them in there, and they wake up with no magic in a virgin forest. It's approximately 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry about the mix-up. I can't remember how to do Celsius. It varies very little from that from time to time. The rain is very regular. It's on a semi-random schedule. There is no snow. There are no hurricanes. There are no earthquakes. While the soil is 2 meters deep, that's incredibly deep for someone that's 5 millimeters high. Everything here they need to survive is present. So, Balthazar hires himself some slavers, always willing to make a buck. They begin to pull him in people. And sometimes he just goes out and nabs a few himself. But he only picks races that are medium or larger. Because remember, Balthazar's a gnome. He's tired of being the short man on campus. So, Balthazar gets himself a large group of people, dumping them in as they go. All they have is the basic tools of farm implements, axes and hoes and hammers and saws and the things you need to build a functioning society. They'll have to go out and find the livestock that does exist in this world. But all they've got is the clothing on their back and the tools he's given them. At first, he leaves them alone. For like a good 3 or 4 years, he just observes. Then once they've become established, once the die-off is taken and they've finally found a way to survive here, that's when Balthazar, the God King, makes his presence known. And for the next 100 years, Balthazar rules this place with an iron fist, forcing them to build him a monumental Isle of Rhodes statue, which in real life is probably about this high, but for a 5 millimeter character, That's pretty darn big. He requires them to make sacrifices of teeny little pieces of food and such, and animals, maybe even other sapient beings. He floats over them with magic, blocking out the sun, his voice booming from the heavens and terrifying the villagers. Because he is God. Then one night, while Balthazar is sleeping, he dies. But the room just keeps on functioning. The rain keeps falling, the sun and the moon keep shining. And after a couple of years, people realize that Balthazar's not coming back. And a generation later, he's just a myth. 2 generations later, people aren't even sure what the statue's for anymore. He's just a god, a local deity. Maybe the only one, who knows? There's no magic here, so it's like our world. And you can have much time pass as you want. I'd say at least 2 generations, but you could go 5 or 6, 120 years. I didn't come to PCs. Now, PCs could have found this place, inadvertently found that the slave entrance, where the slavers came, who, by the way, eventually the slavers ended up in this room, and find themselves walking down a corridor, unknown that the corridor actually is shrinking them down to their tiny place. They find themselves in a room, which then teleports them into the middle of this place, and they're stuck. No magic. They don't even know where they are. They could think they're just some kind of weird flat world. Because the people there don't know. They've been there for generations. They've only ever known this weird flat world. And actually, at a scale of 365 kilometers, unless you're really good at understanding how that works, most people might not even be aware it is flat. Particularly with the weird sun cycle. It may make discovering that more difficult than it was in our world, which was done by the ancient Greeks, by the way. They've known for a long time. We've known for a long time the world was round. Columbus didn't do squat in that regard. Or the player characters could find another entrance, maybe from a monster that found it, dug its way in or something. They find Balthazar, then eventually they find the weird room, and what do? Do they rescue these people? Do they find a way to turn them into this scale that their ancestors were? Well, they'd be lost. They don't know what the world is like. They don't know anything about magic. How far have they developed? Maybe they've crossed the chasm river around there and start to build into the walls like cliff dwellers. Maybe a plague has wiped them out and there aren't many left. Maybe somehow normal scale insects made their way in and are hunting them as monsters. Who knows what's happened? So how would you use this world? What would you do with the land of the Lilliputians? The land of the God King, Balthazar the Mage.